Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Power Is Now TV. My name is Eric Frazier. It's a beautiful day in Southern California, a great day to talk about fair housing. In 2021, we embarked upon a journey to learn more about the 1968 Fair Housing Act. April 11th, 1968, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed it into law, and we're asking the question, is the Fair Housing Act living up to its promise? Is the law really enforceable? Have the hearts and minds of real estate professionals and others who are providing services in housing, have they changed? These are some very important questions because it's 54 years later, folks, and we are still wondering if housing is fair, if discrimination is still a factor. And just watching the news, we know that it is still a significant factor. It's just been a few years ago when the attorney generals across all the states were filing lawsuits for discrimination and redlining. And as you know, there's a whole movement about social justice and reforms that need to take place in the area of housing and banking and criminal justice. And so I have had the best seat in the House interviewing industry leaders across the country to talk about the 1968 Fair Housing Act, and we're going to do it again today. With me today is Mary Ellen Shay, who is the Executive Director of the California Association of Housing Finance Agencies, and she's here to talk about the 1968 Fair Housing Act. Welcome, Mary Ellen, to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Mary Ellen, the pleasure is all mine. I've had the privilege of participating in some of the symposiums you guys have put on, at least one. Looking forward to learning more about your organization and the great work that you do to support housing. In fact, why don't we start there? Tell us a little bit about your organization and your role as Executive Director.
Happy to. CalHFA, the California Association of Local Housing Finance Agencies, the world's longest title, was formed in 1989. At that time, most housing development was financed through mortgage revenue bonds, both single family and multifamily. And so our organization was founded to help local agencies, particularly smaller and medium-sized agencies, administer these bonds effectively and build mostly multifamily senior housing. That was the preferred housing type at the time in the late 1980s. Well, of course, time marches on, and things in the housing world have changed tremendously. While we still do work in mortgage revenue bonds, a lot of new housing products have come about, and those include the tax credits program that was formed federally in 1986. That is a major source of financing here in California. The State Department of Housing and Community Development has $2.3 billion worth of housing programs that they administer annually, and there's more coming down the road all the time. The governor, Newsom, has poured millions and millions of dollars into housing and homelessness activities in the last 3 or 4 years, in particular, with the unfortunate rise of homelessness. And CalHFA is now actively involved in all of those activities, again, on both the single family and the multifamily side. From the activities point of view, the things that we do are an annual symposium. This year it's going to be held on October 24th here in Sacramento at the Holiday Inn, and it is going to be fair housing and single family housing development co-sponsored with the Power Is Now. You know, we're very excited to have this first only in a long, long time in-person meeting. So that's high on our list. The next day on October 25th, we're going to be having our annual meeting. That is more devoted to multifamily housing activities. CalAlpha is one of the few associations that has maintained an interest in single family ownership since the beginning. Homeownership was not seen as the important factor that it truly is in building wealth for minority households. That's a new recognition, and we're proud of the fact that we've been on this train for a long time, and we're going to continue to ride it with our partners, including California YIMBY, for example, California Community Builders, other people. We're not doing this on our own. We value our partnerships. We value our partnership with the Power of Now and all of our others. We also do webinars. We've got one coming up on May 18th about how local agencies can implement density bonus laws more effectively. One of our biggest goals is to provide timely, accurate information for local practitioners who are in small or medium-sized communities. Big communities have lots of resources. Little ones maybe have the same person doing all of their planning, development, fair housing, and janitorial work all in the same person. And we provide an hour and a half worth of power-packed information plus takeaways that they can refer to later at a very reasonable price. We only charge $25 for these little webinars. And this gives people who are in the trenches the tools to do their jobs as well as possible. And as far as I know, we are one of the few agencies that offers these kind of little mini webinars, particularly geared to small and local agencies. That's not to say we don't welcome anybody in our membership. We love developers. We love lenders and investors. Anybody who wants to join CalAlpha, come on down. So that's kind of the summary of what we're up to. We are looking forward to a very big year in terms of fair housing as well as housing development. There are a lot of things coming down the road. And another big part of my job is to follow political activity, legislation, and program and policy development, which I bring back to our membership. And we do a fair amount of lobbying. We endorse bills. We lobby actively for the bills that we support, for the activities that we support.
Mary Ellen, tell us how long you've been with the organization and a little bit about your background as the executive director, because it seems like, man, you guys are doing some incredible work and some highly technical work as it relates to housing.
I started working for CalAlpha in 1991. And I brought with me a fair amount of experience. I got my first job in the housing field in 1969, which dates me, but I'm kind of proud of it. I was hired by the Southern Alameda County Economic Opportunity Agency, which was part of the federal poverty program that Lyndon Johnson instituted in the late 60s, at the very same time the Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968, to be a housing consultant. And the main things that we were doing at that time were investigating housing discrimination complaints and doing the anti-discrimination investigations where a white couple would walk in and look to rent an apartment or a home, and they would be immediately given all of the paperwork, whereas a Black couple would come in and all of a sudden the unit would be rented. So I worked very closely with an organization, Eden Housing, that still exists. It's based in Hayward, one of the best nonprofits in California, if not the whole country. And I started as a fair housing, not exactly investigator, but building information and data and trying to determine what programs should be developed to remediate these housing discrimination activities. And it took a long time, but eventually in the mid-1970s, the federal programs began to emerge. The Section 8 program came about. That was a housing voucher program that provides rental assistance to low-income households, lets them rent wherever they want. The public housing programs were still being built, but there was less public housing being built and more housing was being developed with public and private partnerships. I was lucky enough to be in Shasta County at a time when there was a very active movement to develop housing programs through the city of Reading. The Community Development Block Grant Program was established. I was administrator of that program. I also had the first Section 8 program in the city of Reading. I administered that. And I was also one of the founders as a VISTA volunteer of a group called the Self-Help Home Improvement Project. And that's an organization that encourages folks to invest their own sweat equity in building their own homes. Or if in the case, if you own a home but it needed repair, do your own home repairs. That enables people who don't otherwise have the money to buy their own homes to contribute their sweat equity as a form of or a partial part of the mortgage that they get. So that organization is still going strong. It will celebrate its 50th anniversary next year. Very pleased and proud to have been a part of that. I then moved to Sacramento in the mid-70s, and I went to work for the Department of Housing and Community Development. I administered a bunch of different programs there. We started the first housing assistance program for the disabled. We did a variety of general fund programs that were created by the legislature. And we got the first state housing grant. It was a whopping $100 million. That was all we got, but we spent that money and we made a lot of pre-development loans out of that money and enabled a lot of projects to get underway. This is in the late 70s, early 80s. I became a private consultant in 1984. I write market studies to support housing developments. I also have put together many housing development applications over time. So that's kind of the technical aspects. I know a fair amount about how to put these deals together. They're complicated. They involve many, many, many sources of financing from public and private and local sources. It's hard, it's complicated. It's way more complicated than it ought to be, but that's the way of the world. And those of us who are involved in affordable housing have kind of come to love it in spite of all of its complications and sometimes foolishness. That's me.
Mary Ellen Shay, Executive Director for the California Association of Housing Finance Agencies. Wow. Thank you for sharing your background. I mean, you bring a wealth of experience to housing, and I'm so glad to know you and for you to participate in this discussion about fair housing. You have clearly been on the front line from the beginning of all of it. And so it's going to be great to get your perspective on the 1968 Fair Housing Act and what is being done right now, particularly here in the state of California, to ensure that we achieve the goals and the ideas that the authors of the 1968 Fair Housing Act had in mind. Before we get into the details of the questions in regard to the Fair Housing Act, we have a tradition on our show where we ask all of our guests, what does the phrase, "the power is now," mean to you in the context of who you are and what you do professionally, especially given this is Fair Housing Month?
The power is now means to me that we have been on this journey for a long, long time, but as it was in the past, this journey takes a while, but we are at a moment that has not been replicated since 1968 when fair housing law was passed. There's been so much work done since Black Lives Matter first began in 2013. So much awareness has taken place. It just seems like we're chiming back into that moment in 1968 here in 2022, 54 years later, when everything came together and the importance of equality, fairness, non-discrimination it's everywhere. It's everywhere. I was looking at the books that have been written recently, just right here in the Bay Area. We've got books called The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. We've got an amazing book by a friend of mine. His name is Gene Slater, Freedom to Discriminate, How Realtors Conspired to Segregate Housing and Divide America. And then we've got Golden Gates, The History, the Housing Crisis and a Reckoning for the American Dream by Connor Doherty. It's everywhere. That kind of academic awareness, the rising of this and the recognition of the importance of fair housing has just resurfaced. It is, the power is now. That's what it means to me. It's back in a very big way.
Mary Ellen Shay, wow. What a great power is now statement. And I love the books that you have brought up. Absolutely mandatory reading for anyone who is interested in just being educated about what's going on. Because many people don't really get it. And we're going to get into this, but they don't really get it. They don't really understand fair housing. They don't understand discrimination. They certainly don't understand the whole concept of unconscious bias. Yeah. And the authors you just mentioned here all lay it out very, very clear as to why we are dealing still, here we are, 54 years later, with the same issues. For those of you who are just tuning in, you are watching or listening to the Power is Now Fair Housing series. This is our second year of interviewing industry leaders and experts in housing about the 1968 Fair Housing Act. Mary Ellen, Executive Director with the California Association of Housing Finance Agencies, is with us today to talk about the 1968 Fair Housing Act. We're going to get into the details now. We're going to take a quick break. Please download the mobile app, Power is Now TV. Follow us on all social media. Follow us, like us, subscribe to our magazines at the Power is Now TV, and watch us on Apple TV, Roku, Fire TV. Anywhere live streaming is taking place, you can find the Power is Now TV. We are leading the conversation about real estate. We'll be right back right after this commercial break.
Want to keep up with the current developments happening in the world of real estate? The Real Estate Roundtable, hosted by Eric L. Frazier, is a show you do not want to miss. The show features a panel of VIP agents who are passionate about helping people. It is what they do best. They discuss today's hot topics, latest market updates and trends. The panel also conducts interviews with prominent figures in the industry. New episode every Friday live on Facebook and replay on the Power is Now YouTube channel.
And we're back. For those of you just joining us, welcome to The Power is Now. My name is Eric Frazier. Folks, I have the best seat in the house. I get a chance to sit down with highly intelligent, accomplished people who are doing big things in real estate and in housing. I'm so glad we started this series last year. please go to the website, thepowerisnow.com, and you'll see our 2021 Fair Housing Series. Watch those interviews. And I think we're going to top 2021 with the series today. We have with us Mary Ellen Shay. She's the Executive Director of the California Association of Housing Finance Agencies, and she brings a wealth of knowledge and experience. Folks, she's been involved in housing practically ever since the Fair Housing Act started. And so she has that kind of in-depth knowledge and understanding, and she's working in the business, if you will, of housing to support cities and organizations that want to make a difference. Again, Mary, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure.
So, Mary, April is Fair Housing Month, and I'm so glad it is. It's an opportunity for everybody to talk about it, because we do need to talk about it. I don't think there's going to be any real change among those who provide the services from selling real estate and loans and other activities. There's not going to be any real change until there's real dialogue and discussions, and because it has to start first in the hearts and the minds of individuals before it's put into action. But believe it or not, there are many people who still believe we don't really even need a Fair Housing Act, that, you know, discrimination and is really just a myth. It's not real. And so my question to you is, how important is the Fair Housing Act today? And do we still need a Fair Housing Act?
We absolutely still need a Fair Housing Act. It's more important than ever, because we know that people who are able to purchase homes are far ahead of those who are not in building wealth and family stability for their families. And nothing could be more important than that. It was important in 1968, and it's important right now. Our organization is firmly committed to the development of programs and activities that will heighten the awareness of the importance of the Fair Housing Act. And we communicate that. One of our big jobs in CalAlpha is to communicate with our members and our colleagues about what's going on in all aspects of affordable housing development. And that includes the enforcement of fair housing activities, and the establishment of good practices in local agencies. We have gone on roadshows talking about single-family home ownership programs, and of course that includes components about complying with fair housing requirements. I just can't say more emphatically, fair housing it's equality. It's one of the tenets of our country, and it needs to be enforced and spread throughout the entire country. It's taken a long, long time for us to make not nearly as much progress as we need to. And I think that awareness has really come to the fore in the last, say, 7-8 years. The fact that we have been so remiss in giving people equal opportunity in housing and employment, it's time to catch up. That's why it's important right now. And that's what our organization is attempting to do. And that's what I personally am attempting to do, is to catch up.
Mary Ellen, thank you so much for the work that your organization is doing and bringing attention to the issues of the disparities and the need for support. And the fact that, I didn't even think about the fact that, some cities are well-financed and large and have many people, but there's a lot of cities in California that just don't have the resources and the people. They're doing everything from the technical work to cleaning up the office. And to have an organization like yours to provide support for these cities so they can have an impact in their community is very important. Can you speak to what the state of California is doing. The first governor of the state of California ran on the premise of separating, African Americans from whites. He didn't believe in slavery, but he did believe in the separation of the groups. And so this whole idea of separate and not equal has been, ongoing since the abolishment of slavery. And it's permeated every aspect of our lives. African Americans particularly have just had a tough road at trying to find equality in housing and jobs and everything, every aspect of it. What is the state of California doing to right the wrongs of the past?
Well, there is a lot going on in the Capitol. I will tell you, I am a registered lobbyist, by the way. That means that I adhere to the rules and requirements of lobbying activities and the ethical requirements. There are over 1,000 bills in the current legislative session, which began in January of 2021, that address some aspect of housing, fair housing, affirmatively furthering fair housing, housing development, planning and zoning, just a whole variety of bills that are dedicated in one form or another to increasing fair housing opportunities and increasing the supply of affordable housing. You can't really have a successful fair housing program if you don't have the supply of housing to rent or to own and have available. The very first task force for the study and the development of reparations proposals for African Americans was passed in 2020 by Shirley Weber, who is now the Secretary of State. This is the only reparations task force in the country, and it is active and contemplating a number of proposals. That in itself indicates how active the effort to make up for the wrongs that you were talking about is. It's controversial, needless to say, but I find it very encouraging that the author of this bill ran for Secretary of State. She's the first African-American woman to be Secretary of State. We also have a lot of housing champions in the state legislature. These folks have been on the edge of housing fairness, development, and protocols for years and years and years. Senator Toni Atkins is President Pro Tem of the Senate. She has passed dozens of bills that have encouraged the development of fair housing. She's found different financing sources. She was a spearhead of the housing development bonds that have passed over the years. It's one of the major forms of financing. We have Senator Scott Wiener, who has been just relentless in his efforts to fight discrimination by identifying more and more sites throughout all of California for the development of affordable housing and for equal opportunity housing. It's a passion of his to make more space available for housing at all economic levels. He'll introduce a bill and it'll get shot down, and he'll come back and he'll introduce another version of that bill. Eventually, little by little, unit by unit, we get more diverse housing and more diverse neighborhoods than we've had before. So Toni and Scott are pioneers in this work, and we owe so much to them and their predecessors. The current chair of the Assembly Housing and Community Development Committee is Buffy Wicks from the Bay Area. She is she's shooting for the fences. She has introduced an assembly constitutional amendment that would set aside 5% of the state's general fund for housing and homeless activities for 10 years, starting in 2023. This is absolutely unprecedented. It's a ballot measure, and if she is successful, it will be put on the ballot in November of 2022. Think about that. 5% of the state's general fund money being used for 10 years, annually, 10 years, for housing development and homeless prevention activities. That's a lot of money and a big, big commitment. I don't know if she's going to be successful, but I know she's going to try. We also have other big supporters of affordable housing in the legislature. Assemblymember Tim Grayson from the Concord area is doing a lot of organizational things to streamline the process, trying to organize the financing structures in such a way that people don't have to travel all over the state government to put together their financing, trying to coordinate the activities of our many activities in both the development process and also in the management and administration of existing programs and projects. It's hard technical work. It's controversial, but this is the stuff that gets those houses built and gets our residents in them. And then we also have Reggie Jones Sawyer, who is interested in the facts and figures and trying to develop a database that will talk about how many minority contractors there are involved in the development of affordable housing, because we recognize that equality in jobs is also an incredibly important part of not only the housing development business, but just in equality overall. And so we're trying to come up with programs that will encourage folks, minority subcontractors, to participate in these programs, providing incentives for them to participate. We're trying to determine exactly how many minority contractors there are, and then trying to develop programs that will lower those barriers and get more minorities involved in the development of affordable housing. In specific, that's what his bill is doing. But that concept, I think, goes beyond affordable housing and all development, commercial, institutional, what have you. On the program side, there has been a recognition that minorities of all stripes, including women and the gay and lesbian community, have not had a fair shot at accessing resources. And so there are priority programs now for emerging developers, as well as for minority contractors to access these programs, get priority points for in the competition so that they can actually win the funds to help develop their projects. So it's a proactive activity, recognizing that we haven't done enough in the past, and that in order to square it up a little bit, we need to provide some extra incentives now to get people from across the spectrum into affordable housing development, as well as into the homes themselves.
Mary, you're blowing me away with these programs and initiatives. And the first thing that comes to mind as I'm trying to take notes, and I know for those of you who are watching, you have to be amazed at what's going on right now. And if you're me, you're asking, why haven't I heard about this? Well, where is the media coverage of what these government, our representatives and the legislature are doing? Is it limited to just, a Capitol newsletter and a few lines out of the Sacramento Bee? Or where do you get this information so you can stay on top? Or do you have to be a lobbyist, a registered lobbyist like Mary Ellen Shay to know what's going on?
I think that's what the Powers Now is all about. And definitely it's what CalAlpha is all about. I write a newsletter, we distribute it. I think what we're doing here is amplifying the message. I really do. Yeah. It's exciting, it's fun. Some of it's kind of boring, I will admit, but I'd like to give you an example of some really creative thinking that's going on in the state capitol right now. This is a bill by Christina Garcia, AB 672, which would establish a grant program to local public agencies that convert municipally owned golf courses into affordable housing and open space. Now, the golfers in the world are probably not going to appreciate this, but there are about 250 municipally owned golf courses in California, and a lot of them are not widely used. And so Christina came up with the idea of why not convert these big pieces of open space into sites for affordable housing. And in order to do that, provide an incentive program that will be funded through the Department of Housing and Community Development on a competitive basis for those agencies, local agencies who want to convert their golf courses into affordable housing. The bill is in the Assembly Appropriations Suspense file, which means it's just being held right now. I don't know what the likelihood that this bill will pass is. It is voluntary. Nobody is telling a local agency that you've got to get rid of your golf course. It is a voluntary program. And it could be a real boon in those communities where the resources are being underused and the need is identified as overwhelming, to the point where a local agency will divest itself of its golf course and build affordable housing on this site. I think it's just an amazing example of creative thinking. Whether or not it'll pass, we'll find out.
Well, I hope it passes because, man, I'm thinking about what a tremendous opportunity. So first, I'm thinking the grant itself. I'm sure the grant would be for at least the retail value or very close to the actual value of the land itself.
Yeah.
So the municipality is not necessarily losing out on anything. In fact, this was probably unused land that they invested thousands in grading and making into a golf course. And so they're basically getting reimbursed perhaps for the development costs of the golf course. But what I think is even more significant in a bill like this is that they could build 100 homes. I mean, the typical golf course is thousands, hundreds, if not at least, how many acres? I don't actually know the number to that, but it's got to be several acres of land on a typical municipal golf course. Yeah, right?
35 to 50 acres. I mean, it's a lot.
Wow. So think about the number of homes that you could build on a golf course. And then the city gets the tax revenues from city taxes, the state taxes, which pays for fire, police, and other things. And then on top of that, for every house that's built, I heard this stat many years ago. I don't know if it's still true, but I think it's from the Building Industry Association. For every house that's built, it's something like 70 or 80 jobs are created. And so we're talking job creation on top of that and all the other ancillary businesses that are formed when neighborhoods are built. And so, man, I would love to have her on the show and to bring attention to this very creative strategy to help solve the need for inventory and to stabilize cities, especially smaller cities that may have these municipal golf courses.
Great, we'll see what we can do. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the other activities that are underway, or some of the other bills that have passed and are now being implemented. I mentioned earlier Senator Scott Wiener. He had, and Senator Atkins, they both worked on two bills for years and years that would increase density in previously exclusively single-family neighborhoods. And each time the bills didn't make it through the process. There was too much opposition, but finally in 2021, Sb9 and Sb10 were passed. And Sb9 is a bill that allows for the development of duplexes and in some cases fourplexes in previously 100% single family zoned neighborhoods. This doesn't sound like a very big deal. You're only adding a couple of units or maybe 4 at the most. But from a philosophical standpoint, this is a very big deal because it breaks down that barrier of not of my backyard. I want my single family home with my white picket fence, and I don't want anything else or anybody else in my neighborhood except somebody who looks exactly like me. This bill is being implemented now. It's going somewhat slowly, which is to be expected because the fact is there aren't that many pieces of land that are suitably sited and sized. But like I said earlier, every unit counts. And the fact that we now are creating more diversity in all of our communities, and not just in the very lowest income neighborhoods, is a really big deal for fair housing, in addition to the creation of the additional units that will become available. And that Sb10 is also a bill that increases density. It allows for the development of up to 10 units in previously single family zoned neighborhoods that are close to transit. I think it's less than a half a mile to transit. I'm not positive about that. But the idea is that if you've got a community or if you've got a piece of land that's close to transit, you don't necessarily need all of that parking space, and you can put more units on the same size of land because you don't have all of those big parking requirements. This was very controversial. It's watered down from a bill that Senator Wiener introduced in 2019 or so that didn't get very far at all. That would have vastly increased the size of high density transit areas, but he got this one passed and it is being implemented successfully, and every unit counts. So you have 10 units instead of 1 on the same parcel of land. That's a big win for housing development and for fair housing. I mentioned earlier the minority business survey, the AB 2873 by Reggie Jones Sawyer. This bill too is just, it's really important because it identifies gaps in our efforts to seek equality and opportunity for minorities. And it's planned to identify those barriers that are so hard to overcome for minority contractors and developers. For example, the ability to get bonding or the ability to get insurance can be an insurmountable hurdle to a small minority business. So let's provide insurance pools. Let us make it easier for folks to get bonded. there are ways to solve problems once they are identified. And what Joan Sawyer is doing right now is attempting to identify the problems by finding out how many people there are and are not in the contracting business for the development of affordable housing. There's also some bills that have been passed in the recent past that haven't done as much as we had hoped. In 2020, SB 329 was passed, and it is a bill that prohibits the discrimination of income discrimination, people who are using their Section 8 vouchers to rent an apartment unit. This bill was passed, and the real difference that has been made because of it, as far as I could tell, I did some research about this, is that there now is a prohibition against a landlord when advertising a unit saying no Section 8. That is now illegal. You cannot discriminate against a renter because his income is based on a housing choice voucher. That in itself is a big deal. It is preventing that kind of income discrimination. But whether or not houses have actually been rented, apartments have been rented because of the passage of SB 329, honestly, we don't know. I tried to find out if any complaints have been filed with the Department of Fair Housing and Employment. There are no data available. I just don't know whether or not the bill's intent is being met, other than it is publicly acknowledged that you can't discriminate against people because of their income. So we come up with a lot of good ideas. They sound great on paper and thinking, oh, now people are going to be able to rent these places just so much easier, so much quicker. We don't know. There is a lack of personnel. That's an overreaching problem. Department of Fair Housing and Employment is backed up for years in some cases. There are so many different forms of discrimination that are experienced in so many different aspects of our lives that those budgets haven't been increased for years, that there just aren't enough people to enforce the regulations that have been passed over the years. So that hinders their efficacy, obviously. So it's not all sweetness and rainbows and unicorns out there. You got to have the power to enforce the law in order for it to be effective. And I'm not sure that we're able to do that as well as we ought to be able to do at this point.
Mary, this has been so incredibly educational. And for those of you who are just tuning in, or if you're listening to the podcast, we're talking to Mary Ellen. She's the Executive Director for the California Association of Housing Finance Agencies. And as you can clearly hear and see, she is a bona fide expert on housing, and she knows what's going on at the state level. Mary, thank you so much for sharing these details about legislation that has passed, legislation that is pending. What I like about the last couple, Sb9 and 10, is increasing density, being able to convert a single family lot into a 4-unit building, or a lot near transit from a single family home to 10 units. Increasing density. But you make a good point, and that is we have these great laws that have passed, and we're, the 1968 Fair Housing Act in and of itself is law. Title 8 and the amendments further strengthen the law. But if you don't have people to actually administrate and to enforce the law, then it's like not having a law at all. And if you are not changing the hearts and minds of individuals who are in a position to discriminate or deny access to housing or credit, then again, it's the effect of that is not, it's like not having a law at all. we need more enforcement of fair housing laws, but we also need housing so that the law can be enforced. It's kind of like during Christmas time, you watch on television people in Walmart and different stores, fighting over Nintendos and various things that are hot, and there's no more, and
Yeah.
Fortunately, when there's a low supply of something, it brings out the worst in people, right? I mean, people have actually been killed over consumer goods because they were trying to get something in a store during Christmas time. And I think a lot of the problems that exist and will continue to exist in California and other states is a supply issue as well. And that is that the worst of us comes out when there's a low supply, that people will perhaps be more inclined to discriminate or to deny access, to do something to ensure that the house is being sold to whoever they want it to be sold to, or the opportunity to or to buy in a particular neighborhood, because there's no homes available. Do we really want this person or that family or this person to rent this unit or this house when they are truly the minority? And so, in my view, the advent of new legislation and laws is great, but we also need enforcement. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Again, Mary, thank you for your time today. Can you share, as we wrap up here, your final thoughts on fair housing and home ownership, especially being that it is the primary driver for wealth for minorities?
I believe in equality. I believe that with equality comes freedom. And we need a community, a country that is open and free and equal. Fair housing, affordable housing is a way to bring underserved communities up into a higher level of income and wealth building, a higher level of educational opportunity, higher access to healthcare. Having a good, stable home, open and available to all, is opening the door to equality in all other aspects of our life. I mean, what could be more important than having an opportunity to be your best self, to have your best family, to have the best jobs, to have the best house that you can? It's everything. It's everything.
Mary Ellen Shay, Executive Director of the California Association of Housing Finance Agencies, thank you so much for your time today on our second year of the 1968 Fair Housing Series on The Power Is Now TV.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Well, there you have it, folks. Another great show on The Power Is Now TV. This has been the 1968 Fair Housing Series 2022. And man, oh man, am I excited about the content that we're creating. Educational, empowering information. Reach out to your local representatives if you're interested in learning more about the bills that are pending in the legislature. Think about what you can do to further empower others to support fair housing. It's just a lot, isn't it? And the 1968 Fair Housing Act is alive and well, but we have a long way to go, 54 years and counting. I think that we can implement change. We can do better than what we've been doing. I believe it begins with changing the hearts and minds of real estate professionals and lenders. I believe it begins with expanding opportunities to build more housing. It begins with more education and training and certifications. There's a lot of work to do in fair housing. And so I am glad that we decided last year that we'll be talking about this every year until there is no more time. And so thank you again for watching the series. If you're listening to the podcast, share it. If you're watching this on Apple TV, Roku, Fire TV, or mobile device, please share it. Please download Powers Now TV on your mobile phone. Please let others know. Here's what they need to know, others, because you're on, already. The Powers Now media has a singular focus on housing and homeownership. That's all we do. It is information. It is not entertainment. Our goal is to be the HGTV of real estate information, like they are of real estate entertainment. Who doesn't like entertainment? Of course, we all like entertainment. But at some point, we need to go beyond entertainment and find out what we can do to own a home, what we can do to deal with the challenges and the obstacles that we face in buying a home, what we can do to repair our credit, or to save money, or to partner up with other people. These are the topics that we talk about here on the Powers Now TV. I want to encourage you to watch the Homebuyer Town Hall shows that are happening across the country. Folks, we have 26 shows in development, soon to be 50. We will have homebuyer town halls happening in every state of the union. If you are a seasoned real estate professional with a minimum of 10 years in the business, full time, please reach out to us if you're interested in hosting a show in your area. We have a ton of areas we need to cover, and we need seasoned, highly intelligent, smart, professional, successful real estate agents on our platforms to help us build out this network. Well, again, thank you for watching today. And I certainly hope that you've gained some invaluable information that you will share with others. Remember, we are at our best and we maximize our success when we act now. The power is now. Thank you for watching.